This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. King James VI of Scots and First of England faced many threats. Possibly the most famous plot, at least where I'm from, was one that was hatched and then ultimately foiled in November 1605. This plot was the attempt by a cohort of disaffected Roman Catholics to assassinate King James, his wife Queen Anne, their eldest son Prince Henry, the king's ministers and members of his parliament, all by blowing up the opening of that parliament. By 1605, however, James was more than accustomed to people plotting against his life and rule. Many of these plots are, I would argue, today less well known. And perhaps that's understandable, because the 1605 plot is, after all, the only one that we choose to remember and memorialise through annual fireworks. And I am aware of the irony of celebrating the foiling of a planned explosion by making a whole bunch of other explosions, but there we are. In any case, today's video is going to look at an earlier alleged plot, one that occurred a few years before James even came to England. But before we jump into today's topic, I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring another video on this channel. When it comes to building, updating and managing my website, Squarespace has really made all the difference. Squarespace's Blueprint website design tool offers me a massive variety of website templates, all of which are super easy to customise in every way. And that is due to their Fluid Engine website design system. With this, it's simply a case of dragging and dropping. For even more convenience, you can edit your website, not only through your desktop, but also on your phone. I can also keep track of my website traffic through a whole bunch of useful analytics tools. Above all, it's been really helpful to keep an eye on my mailing list emails. It helps me make sure that they've all reached their intended destination, but also lets me see if or indeed when they've been opened and what links are being clicked in them. So if you have signed up to receive emails from me, but you haven't seen any of them yet, please do have a little check to make sure they haven't been caught up in your spam filter. To build, launch and manage your own website, go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/readingthepast to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. But now it's time to take a look at the Gowrie Conspiracy. The Gowrie Conspiracy, or perhaps that should more properly be alleged conspiracy, which we're going to explore today, takes its name from both the location and the people involved, the Earls of Gowrie at Gowrie House in Perth. While the event we're looking at today occurred on the 5th of August 1600, if we're going to get a deeper context, we need to travel back, the better part of 2 decades, to August 1582. At that point, a 16-year-old James VI of Scots, a young man eager to assert his rights, place and authority as king, was seized by what Jenny Wormald describes as, quote, a group of hardline Presbyterian nobles under William Ruthven, 1st Earl of Gowrie. This group intended to assert their influence and control over their young king, who they had come to fear was being led astray by a pro-French, pro-Catholic faction at court that was being headed up by the king's cousin, who had recently been created Duke of Lennox. As a side note, but a relevant one in terms of the relationships between the Ruthvens and the Scottish Crown, William's father Patrick had been a leading participant in the murder of Mary Queen of Scots' favourite, David Rizzio. That murder had occurred in front of her while she was heavily pregnant with James. In the aftermath, Patrick fled into England, and so he was tried for his crimes in absentia. His titles and properties were subject to forfeiture for treason and for his failure to attend court. From the August of 1582, King James was being held by Patrick's son William and his so-called Ruthven raiders for 10 months, before the king finally managed to escape, which he did in the June of 1583. Immediately after his escape, the king asserted that he desired to rule for all people, that he would give no favour to any particular faction. There was, it seems, to now be a middle way in governance for Scotland. However, that did not prevent the execution of the Earl of Gowrie at the start of May 1584. Fast forward to August 1600. King James VI of Scots was now 34 years old, married, a father of 3 surviving children, and on top of this, was widely recognised as being the most likely claimant for the throne of England, if, or rather when, Queen Elizabeth I died. Nevertheless, it is suggested by some that the legacy of that 1582 Ruthven raid was still being felt, that King James continued to distrust the Ruthvens of Gowrie House, while they, it would be alleged, felt they had a score to settle regarding the execution of their patriarch. They may also potentially have wished to see their father's hopes for the soul of their nation come to fruition. After all, the Ruthven raiders had the future of the Presbyterian Kirk in mind when they set about their business back in 1582. Was it possible that at least some of the Ruthven sons had found themselves feeling increasingly dismayed at their king's apparent antagonism towards their Kirk, or at least towards the seemingly uncompromising Presbyterianism that was arguably favoured by their father? John Ruthven, who was the 3rd Earl of Gowrie after the execution of his father William and the death of his elder brother James, who had previously been the 2nd Earl, also happened to be a creditor of the king. Indeed, King James owed this family a substantial amount. I have seen different sums mentioned, from £48,000 all the way up to £80,000. In either case, these amounts represent millions in modern money. On the 5th of August 1600, King James was at Falkland Palace. Early in the morning, a visitor arrived. It was Alexander Ruthven, the younger brother of John, 3rd Earl of Gowrie. Alexander had come to inform his king, apparently, of the discovery of a mysterious man, who was in possession of a hoard of treasure that had subsequently been seized and secured at Gowrie House in Perth. The king's interest was seemingly piqued. He was determined to investigate this matter himself. The king reported that he was suspicious that the man found with this gold was in fact a Jesuit carrying funds that might have been brought in to attempt to disrupt the Kirk and Crown in Scotland. Accompanied by a sizable courtly retinue, King James thus set off for Gowrie House. Once he arrived, the king was presented with a meal that he ate in private with his hosts, the rest of the company being cared for elsewhere. After this meal, the king then accompanied Alexander Ruthven and the household chamberlain, Andrew Henderson, upstairs. According to the accounts of both King James and the chamberlain Henderson, once this small party of 3 came into an upper room, Alexander almost at once turned on his king. He locked the door to the room and drew a dagger. He accosted King James, speaking of his desire to exact retribution for the execution of his father. Then, apparently, and perhaps slightly oddly, Alexander went in search of his brother the Earl. He left the king in the keeping of Henderson. There are differing accounts as to what happened next. Some say that Alexander returned and that he and James scuffled. Others, meanwhile, make no mention of him returning. The sources do agree that the king was able to access an open window, and through that window to alert his entourage of the danger he faced. He screamed of treason and of murder. As courtiers and servants rushed up to their king's aid, violence erupted. Alexander was reportedly stabbed by James's page of honour, John Ramsay, before being pushed back down the stairs, possibly by King James himself. Alexander was soon found bleeding on the stairs by one of the king's trusted friends, Sir Thomas Erskine, and it was he who gave Alexander his final blow. It is said that this young man's last words were, quote, "Alas, I had nae wit, meaning blame, of it. Amy L. Jahala points out that, quote, it was said later that neither sword nor dagger could be found near Ruthven's body, which was subsequently dismembered as that of a traitor. Only a rapier, rusted to virtual immobility in the scabbard. Alexander's brother, the Earl, who, in spite of having the king in his house, had apparently wandered off into town, raced back when he heard news of the uproar. He would discover his brother dead on the stairs, and then he would rush up them, seemingly intending to exact his vengeance on those he found above. He would not reach his king. Instead, he too was killed. Although dead, the Earl and his brother were transported to Edinburgh and tried for treason. They were convicted. Their lands and goods thus became the property of the Crown. Their bodies were punished as traitors, hanged, drawn and quartered. And for a while, the 5th of August was observed as a day of celebration and thanksgiving. There are some very murky corners to this event. It was, and continues to be, variously alleged that, 1. The Earl of Gowrie had been in receipt of letters from both King James and Queen Anne, inviting him to join the royal hunting party at Falkland. 2. That these letters were found on the Earl after his death and were for some reason destroyed. 3. That Alexander had been the one to win the favour of Queen Anne. There were apparently even, I think, far-fetched rumours that she had taken him for a lover, and that the king, suspecting Alexander with his wife, wished to confront him, or worse. 4. That Alexander had actually taken the king's fancy, that James had propositioned him on the 5th of August 1600 and had been violently rebuffed, that this is what started the struggle that would lead to the eventual bloodshed and death. 5. That King James had in fact planned the whole thing himself, in the hopes that it might allow him to be rid of some popular young nobles who came from a family that he distrusted and also happened to owe an extortionate amount of money to. Or 6. Perhaps James's account is the correct one. The inhabitants of Gowrie House had created a ruse to lure their king into a trap where they could exact their revenge for the execution of their father. So what do you think of the Gowrie Conspiracy, of its true causes and motivations? Do you think it was one or maybe some of the things that I've just mentioned? Or do you think perhaps that something else was really going on? What do you think of the fact that James's preservation from this alleged plot is something that would be celebrated in Scotland and then in England, at least for a time? After all, this was not the first, nor, as we know, would it be the last time that James's escape from danger would become a day of national thanksgiving. I wonder, how do you think this process served to support his kingship in both Scotland and England? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video. I'd also love it if you could pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement. And we are told the more engagement video gets, the more YouTube shares it out, and that should help us to grow our community. I am slightly concerned as to what emoji to suggest, because at a point I'm thinking, let's do something that's plotty or assassination-y without annoying the YouTube algorithm overlords. So see what you can get away with putting in the comment section. I look forward to seeing what you choose. You can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please do share it with your friends, and if you like the channel, let some pals know about it. You can tell me you like this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, now is the ideal time to check to make sure that YouTube has not unsubscribed you against your will while you're there. Checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear, and that way YouTube claim they will tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I'm next going live, which I do a couple of times a month to discuss the history news, and I know you're not going to want to miss that. We have, of course, got our failsafe. I've got a website. It's www.katrinamarchant.com. It will be linked in my description box. If you head over to the contact page of the website, you'll see a little box. If you put your email address in that box, that will add you to my mailing list, and it will let me send you out an email once a week to let you know what I've been up to, and also to send you any useful links that you might want for my content over the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.